Good evening, everyone. This is Jamie Anson. I'm the Director of Events for the Walkway over the Hudson, and we are welcoming Katie and Dan with Riverkeepers this evening, and it's going to be an amazing presentation. Just to let you know, we have this great presentation once a month. It's called the Great Connector Series. We accept donations, of course, and you can go to our walkway.org site, and there's a button for donate. But remember, we do have a membership available that you can get discounts for events and wonderful things to happen at the walkway. So just remember to visit the website, walkway.org, and it has some amazing events coming up for 2022. I'm going to welcome Shirley Rinaldi, who's going to introduce the speaker. Shirley, can you take over?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jamie. And again, welcome to everybody to the Great Connector series. We also welcome Dan Shapley and Katie Leung. Both work with the Riverkeeper organization. Dan is the co-director of Science and Patrol, and Katie is a volunteer and outreach coordinator. Just before we start, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Riverkeeper. It makes me feel kind of embarrassed that I really, until I met these two lovely people, I didn't know much. And I know I'm going to know a lot more after tonight. So thank you both of you very much for giving up tonight to come and present. And you can pass this on to other people that this is recorded. It will be available on the YouTube channel. So Riverkeeper was founded in 1966 as the Hudson River Fishermen's Association. And today, Riverkeeper continues its fight, seeking scientists and activists to protect and restore the Hudson River. It also works to ensure that over 9 million New Yorkers have clean, safe drinking water. Riverkeeper specializes in solutions such as improving wildlife habitat, fostering sustainable energy, increasing investment in water supply and sewer systems, and rallying thousands of volunteers to restore their local riverfronts. And if this is something that you would like to be involved in, Dan and Katie have said that you can sign up to volunteer, to receive emails and updates of their work. And you'll find all the information you need on riverkeeper.org. So it's my pleasure to introduce Katie and Dan. Thank you both very much.
Hi, everybody. Hope you're having a good evening on this Super Bowl or non-Super Bowl Sunday, however you like to celebrate. So as Shirley says, my name is Katie Leung. I'm the volunteer and outreach coordinator for Riverkeeper. And what I do is that I run our volunteer program and work on organizing service projects, including cleanups, invasive species removals, and native tree plantings. And those are both with corporate and public volunteers across the Hudson Valley and New York City. And primarily I will work on the Riverkeeper Sweep, which is our annual day of service that we organize at over 100 different sites on the Hudson River. We usually attract about like thousands of volunteers cleaning up the river every year for that day. And I'll talk more about the sweep later in this presentation. There will be a Q&A session, so we will so we can, if we can have everybody to hold their questions until the end of the presentation, we will definitely get to everybody's questions there. And I'll have Dan introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Shapley, and all right, sorry, I got a momentarily muted.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, am I unmuted now? Can you hear me?
Yes, you are. Go ahead,
Okay,
Dan.
great. And I've been with Riverkeeper now over 10 years, and I'm a lifelong Hudson Valley resident. My work at Riverkeeper actually included organizing our first couple of sweeps back when we were starting that project, and has also focused a lot on helping volunteers to measure water quality where they live along the tributaries of the Hudson, and to do a lot of advocacy related to improving water quality and particularly focusing on drinking water quality. So I'm very happy to be here tonight. Also a huge fan of the walkway over the Hudson. And I'll turn it back over to Katie to get us started.
All right, there we go. All right, thanks, Dan. So All right, so to start, Riverkeeper started back in 1966, as Shirley mentioned before, and we started as the Hudson River Fishermen's Association, which fought back against polluters who were basically ruining their livelihoods. And this included fighting back against oil discharge that was coming from the Penn Central Pipe a few decades ago, and Con Edison's Storm King hydropower plant proposal, which would have destroyed a major striped bass spawning area, as well as General Electric for illegally releasing PCBs. And in the 50 years plus since then, Riverkeeper's mission has changed and evolved and is now to protect and restore the Hudson River from source to sea and safeguard drinking water supplies through advocacy rooted in community partnerships, science, and law. And for our vision, we envision a future in which the Hudson River, its tributaries, and Watershed and the New York City drinking watershed are ecologically healthy, resilient, and teeming with life, provide reliable sources of safe drinking water, are recovered from historic and inequitable environmental harms, are safe and accessible for recreational activities, and are valued and stewarded by all, including all of you. And to reach this vision, we work to defend, restore, and engage. And what does that mean? Riverkeeper is New York's clean water advocate, by which we hold polluters and the government accountable for any activity that is or would be detrimental to the river. And we're also making a huge effort to clean the Hudson and remove dams that no longer serve a purpose in order to make the river full of life again. We also partner with hundreds of community groups and local activists to make our waterways and drinking water cleaner, safer, and healthier. And how do we do all that? Well, it started back in September 2000 when our boat Captain John Lipscomb began patrolling the Hudson River aboard the R. Ian Fletcher, which is a 36-foot Chesapeake Bay style wooden vessel. And here it is right here in this image. So from April to December each year, he travels over 5,000 nautical miles between New York Harbor and Troy, searching out and deterring polluters, monitoring tributaries and waterfront facilities, conducting a sampling program to measure fecal contamination, and supporting other scientific studies. He also has taken regional decision makers and media out on the river so that the river has a chance to advocate for itself. Riverkeeper has also been Hudson Valley's chief law enforcer when it comes to safeguarding our water resources. And we recognize the important role that public policy plays in our efforts to protect the Hudson River and New York City's drinking water supply. Our staff attorneys and watershed experts collaborate to identify legislative initiatives that support our legal work and advance our mission, which includes having established a Clean Water National Trust Fund, protecting wetlands and habitat, increasing and securing green funding, and encouraging smart energy use and production in New York State. We also have a watchdog program that community members are involved in with keeping an eye on signs of pollution in the river, in which they can then report to us, and we check to see what the sources of pollution are. And we also have a citizen science water quality sampling program that began in 2006, which Dan can dive into a little more into these next few slides.
Great. Well, we decided to frame today's conversation about how the Hudson is doing in terms of the Clean Water Act, which this year, 2022, is marking its 50th anniversary. And we are marking that anniversary as well with other keeper groups across the country and world. So Riverkeeper was one of the original organizations like this that adopted a waterway and said, we're going to try and restore and protect and take care of this place. Now there's well over 300 organizations like ours, and they're part of the Waterkeeper Alliance, which you see in that as part of that logo on the right. So together we'll all be marking this anniversary this year. Without going into great detail about what the Clean Water Act is and does, and it has done some remarkable things, it's had some limitations, but in general, it set out these broad goals that we should have water that's safe for swimming, safe for fishing, safe for drinking, and that should be all water. And so we really wanted to take a look here as we're getting started in this year, how is the Hudson doing? How swimmable, how drinkable, how fishable? So we'll go through that now with the next slide. So is the Hudson swimmable? We think of the Hudson, when we talk about the Hudson, we call it the People's Beach because we have only 4 of official bathing areas with lifeguards where the water quality is monitored routinely. There are 2 in Ulster County, Kingston Point Beach and Ulster Landing. There's the Beacon River Pool in Dutchess County, and then Croton Point Beach down in Westchester County. But we have observed, Katie showed you the picture of our patrol boat, we observe people swimming all over the place. So even though it's not an official beach, people are anywhere there's a shoreline, anywhere that somebody can throw down a boat anchor, they're jumping in the water, they're swimming, they're jet skiing, they're tubing, they're wading. And these are all activities where you need clean water to enjoy them. And that's of course what we want. We all want to enjoy this majestic river and to get out and swim in it. So we have been trying since, well, 2006, like Katie mentioned, when we started the pilot program, in 2008, since we got really ramped up with it, to measure water quality in the Hudson River to answer a basic question: is it safe for swimming? And then we've engaged over time hundreds of community scientists who have helped gather thousands of water samples in the Hudson and its tributaries to try and answer this question. And you'll see the results in the next slide. So in broad strokes, most of the Hudson River is safe for swimming most of the time, which is great news. But not everywhere. It's not, we haven't met that swimmable standard that the Clean Water Act set consistently all of the time. And where we see problems is particularly after rain, because we have in some places combined sewers that are designed to overflow with excess stormwater, the same pipes carrying stormwater as carrying the sewage. So as the stormwater infiltrates, the sewage overflows as well. That of course leads to swimming conditions that are not safe. We also see problems from just other sorts of runoff off the landscape and what it carries with it, and that can make the water unsafe. So our next slides we'll see a little bit more detail how we see the data shake out over the course of the estuary. So this is a simple color coding that we use to help guide people through our data. We compare all the data we gather to EPA safe swimming standards. Stop red obviously means it's over the line. It's considered unsafe. It wouldn't be, if it were a public beach, it would be closed that day because of the water quality. Green means good. The water quality is within that range that is acceptable for a beach. And then yellow tends to be where we'll see the impacts generally after rain, but in dry weather, you would expect pretty safe conditions. So with the next slide, we'll kind of break this down just a little bit by the type of sampling. So we see patterns in our sampling data that really point to the middle of the river, that mid-channel, away from the shoreline, almost always safe for swimming. The exceptions, those reds and yellows in that first chart on the left, are really in the Capital District, where we have 6 communities with combined sewers, over 90 pipes that overflow in the rain. And so you really see that impact even out in the middle of the river and quite a ways down from the Capital District. But around here in the Mid-Hudson Valley, away from the shoreline, you have pretty consistently good water for swimming. I should mention there that, of course, water quality is only one thing that makes water safe, right? Boat traffic, currents, a lifeguard or lack of lifeguard, all of these things are important factors that people should consider before going swimming. We obviously focus on water quality, but you want to consider all those things before jumping in. As we move across these charts to go back to the slide, close to the shoreline, you see, oh, sorry, you can stay on that slide. Close to the shoreline, you see that yellow chunk is much bigger. So we see, not surprisingly, a bigger impact, more locations that we sample that are affected by rain. Luckily here in the mid-Hudson, even at our shoreline sites throughout much of this reach, we see still green, good water quality much of the time. As you get into the tributaries, places like the Rondout Creek, Esopus Creek, where it's still tidal, part of our estuary, influenced by the tides from the Atlantic Ocean, there you see much greater risk from rain and much greater chance of encountering water that's not meeting the beach quality. Next slide, please. So what can we do to make the Hudson more swimmable? What we are engaged with is really focusing in on our infrastructure, our pipes, our pump stations, our treatment plants. Much of this infrastructure was built with the infusion of federal money that came with the Clean Water Act and a similar state law that preceded it called the Pure Waters Bond Act back in 1960s. I forget the date, 65, I want to say. And so a lot of this infrastructure dates back 50 years or more in some places. Down in Wappingers Falls, I remember hearing about them pulling out some clay pipes that had been put in around the turn of the 20th century. So pipes just don't last that long. And as they fail, we get worse water quality because more sewage enters the water without treatment. So throughout the Hudson River and its tributaries, we see almost $1 billion that's been identified by communities in needs to invest in this type of infrastructure. So to meet that need, we advocate at the state level and the federal level to make sure that there's support for communities to do that work, because most of the time, the smaller cities and our villages just don't have the resources to be able to make these investments without help from the state and federal government. So there are three things that we're advocating in this budget cycle. Governor Hochul has made proposals that'll help really continue and increase investments. So we want to see those, the Clean Water Green Jobs Bond Act, which we'll all have the chance to vote on hopefully in November, needs to get an approval by the legislature in the next couple months. Similarly, we want to see $1 billion put into the Clean Water Infrastructure Act, which helps fund these projects across the state, and the Environmental Protection Fund, which funds a number of important programs, including some that fund infrastructure like this. So we encourage you to visit our Action Center. The address is there, riverkeeper.org/take-action. And we have one message that you could send today by email to support one of these initiatives, and we'll have more over time. So please keep your eyes on that. Next slide, please. So finally, is the Hudson drinkable? This is a question that, frankly, even 5 years ago, I think would be surprising for people to hear in a presentation, because the awareness of the importance of the Hudson as a drinking water source is something that we've really focused on with the communities that rely on it over the last several years. Over 100,000 people rely on the Hudson River as their source of drinking water. That's Poughkeepsie, city and town, Hyde Park, town and village of Rhinebeck, and Highland and Port Ewan. So all through this mid-Hudson stretch, this is our drinking water source. And these are my neighbors too. I've spent a lot, I worked in Poughkeepsie, I lived in Poughkeepsie, I lived in Highland, I've now live in Rhinebeck. My son goes to school in the Rhinebeck School District, where the water's coming out of the tap is Hudson River water. So this is important to me personally, as well as I think critical public interest, because so many of us rely on this water source. So Riverkeeper worked back in 2018 to help the communities that rely on the river come together as the Hudson River Drinking Water Intermunicipal Council, which is a mouthful. So they've come up with a shorthand, which is the Hudson 7, for the 7 different communities that rely on this water source. And the purpose is pretty simple. It's just to put a spotlight on the fact that this is a drinking water source and to advocate for it, to make sure that it's good quality before it gets to the treatment plant, and that the treatment plants do their job and make sure it's producing good quality water for all of us. The council has been working on a range of issues. They have been engaged with the Coast Guard on spill prevention and response. They have been working with the DEC to make sure that the cleanup of coal tar from the old manufactured gas plant that was in Poughkeepsie a century ago is cleaned up from the bottom of the river, and and a number of other issues. I wanted to linger on that coal tar for just a second because Katie mentioned our watchdog program where we get reports from the public about concerns that they have. We get a lot of reports from people walking on walkway over the Hudson. They look over, especially at low tide, and they'll see a rainbow sheen on the surface of the water near the Poughkeepsie shoreline. I see Shirley nodding, you've seen it. And we get calls, DEC gets calls. That is about 7 acres of coal tar that is on the bottom of the river, been there about 100 years, and over in certain conditions, it will bubble up and leave a little blurb of rainbow sheen on the surface. And so we'll get a call and saying somebody's dumping oil in the river. Well, not really, it was dumped 100 years ago, but what we want to do is see that removed responsibly. Central Hudson is the company that is responsible for that cleanup because its predecessor companies had operated the plant that discharged that pollution. But the Hudson 7 is so concerned about it because as Central Hudson began its cleanup back, I want to say in late 2018, it disturbed some of that coal tar and it actually drifted up and reached the Poughkeepsie drinking water intake. So that whole cleanup now is being redesigned with an eye towards protecting the drinking water intakes and making sure that there's no disturbance of the pollution that will affect the drinking water. And it's that kind of lens that the Hudson 7 has brought to a range of projects and on the river to make sure that they're really sensitive to the drinking water concerns and the quality for these communities. And the last thing I wanted to mention about the Hudson 7 is that they are starting, I should say, and they have started work with the state on the Drinking Water Source Protection Program, which is a program that Riverkeeper advocated for after Newburgh had its drinking water crisis back in 2016. And it's meant to bring a more sophisticated, multifaceted planning effort to the protection of all of our public drinking water supplies. And there are communities around the state taking part now. Peekskill, Ossining, New Paltz, and a number of others in our region are going through this process, Red Hook. And the Hudson 7 is now going through it as well. So at the back end of this year or two process, there'll be a plan put together that will really identify strategies for making sure that these water sources either are restored if they have water quality problems today or are protected if they have good water quality, that we want to make sure it stays that way. So thanks. Next slide. And I think I will mention about our Hudson River fish. So that other part of the Clean Water Act, is it swimmable? Is it drinkable? Is it fishable? So the Hudson is one of the most incredible estuaries in the world. It is one of the most productive estuaries on the East Coast. It is the nursery for fish that spend their lives in the ocean and as well as fish that spend all of their lives in the Hudson River. And it was, while it remains an amazing estuary that is productive and helping to sustain fish, many of our fish are at historically low populations. They've been decimated by habitat loss, overfishing, pollution, a number of other impacts that have left many of our signature fish like sturgeon, striped bass, shad, herring, eel at a fraction of their the abundance that they once had. And these fish had sustained our diets and cultures for thousands of years before European colonization and commercial fishing into the 1990s and 2000s, which depending on the audience sounds very recent or long ago. I was talking to a high school audience not too long ago and I said, they were catching Atlantic sturgeon for their caviar right here off of Hyde Park in 1996. And I was thinking, hey, that was recent. And they looked at me like it was ancient history. So this is recent history that we've had commercial fishing on the Hudson. And it's important that we work to restore those fish populations. Oh, next slide. As I said, many are declining or at very low levels. And the other thing that's important is that PCBs contaminate our fish still at levels that make them unsafe for many of us to eat, which is a great injustice. You know, we have at this moment, you know, for many years now, where we've had this wonderful embrace of locally grown food. Everyone wants food from the local farm, the farmer's market. And here we have this incredible food source at our doorstep that we can't touch, we can't safely eat. And it doesn't even cross people's minds that we lack the access to that, but that is a grave injustice that we can't go catch a fish, eat it, and make it part of our diet. We also have threats from invasive species. The zebra mussels that came in the 90s disrupted the ecosystem in significant ways. The round goby, which is a small fish that just made it here through the Erie Canal from the Great Lakes and into the Hudson, is a voracious eater of eggs. So we don't know yet what the impacts will be, but we can anticipate that it will have some significant disruptions on the ecosystem. And we know that there will be other invasions through that Erie Canal, particularly that we want to stop before they happen. Next slide. Excuse me. Some of the things that we can do are to remove obsolete dams, which Katie will touch on after this slide. As I said, block that invasive species at the Erie Canal. There's a good proposal on the table that's come from the state that we want to support, which would continue to allow for boating, but make sure that we reestablish a physical block somewhere around Rome, New York, where right now the Great Lakes and the Hudson River watersheds are artificially connected because of that canal. So as long as we can keep a barrier there again, or recreate a barrier there, we can hopefully stop the next invasion before it happens and protect the ecosystem from the disruption that comes from those invasive species. We also advocate for a lot of policy and regulations to make sure that species are recovering. Our striped bass, for instance, popular with recreational anglers, but are really in decline over the last several years. So we've promoted the use of circle hooks as opposed to J hooks. It's a simple way fishermen can still go and catch fish, but it does much less damage to the fish. And so on a catch and release, those fish are more likely to survive. And it's a help to that species. And of course, we need to continue to address our legacy contaminants, our industrial contaminants that are in the affecting the ecosystem, and most notably those PCBs. So with that, I will pass it back to Katie.
Yeah, so I'll just stay on this slide to talk more about dam removal. So as Dan mentioned, many of our iconic Hudson River species, such as the river herring, striped bass, American shad, Atlantic sturgeon, eels, other species, their populations migrate into the Hudson every year to renew their populations, which unfortunately are mostly in decline, in large part because of the damming in the Hudson, historical damming, I should say. And when we are talking about dams, we're definitely not talking about the giant dams like the Hoover Dam in the West. These dams are small but significant enough to restrict migration and movement and are completely obsolete. And so in the Hudson Valley, we have an enormous opportunity to help some of these fish populations rebound. And by removing these dams, we can reopen vital spawning grounds and allowing these populations to heal and flourish again, and reviving the quality of life in the Hudson. Riverkeeper has identified about 1,600 dams, many of which are hidden from view, but still fragment the rivers and streams of the Hudson Valley. Our landmark success was at NYNJ, which was a dam removal project by Riverkeeper, the City of Troy, and DEC back in 2016. that was just the start of it all. And there are many other dams that still need to come down. So it's quite a hefty lift. But with each dam that we remove, that is still a success, and it keeps adding to the success of the project. So within days of removal of the dam in NYNJ, thousands of river herring were moving upstream to spawn in the river for the first time in 85 years. And following that were several more removals, such as the more recent dams that were taken down at Quissy Creek and the Jamawissa Creek. So yeah, many more that still needs to come down, but still like chipping away at it. And every chip that we make is still a success. Now, one of the main pieces of legislation that I do want to touch on, and it's super important that we are keeping an eye on and that we have greatly advocated for, is the New York, New Jersey Watershed Protection Act. If you want to look that up, that is HR 4677. If this bill is passed, the act would authorize up to $50 million in federal funds annually for 5 years in order to protect and restore the Hudson Raritan estuary and the communities that depend on healthy waterways. Currently, there are 28 estuaries throughout the nation that already receive this multi-million-dollar funding from the federal government. Surprisingly, however, the Hudson Raritan estuaries do not. And as one of the most populous metropolitan areas, we think that it is well past time that our Hudson River watershed gets some help from the federal government. And if passed, the federal government would be required to protect wildlife and drinking water supplies, manage flooding, initiate restoration projects, and solve environmental justice issues. The bill was first introduced by Congressmember Paul Tonko this past summer, and Riverkeeper met with both New York and New Jersey representatives to encourage co-sponsorship. And you definitely have an essential voice in this too, in having the bill to become law. So you can still express your support for this bill to your Congress member to push it through further into the legislative process. So you can either send an email to your member of Congress, but we believe that calls are way more effective if you have the time to do so. So contacting your member of Congress would be the most vital step that you can take in order to get this act passed. The last thing that I do want to touch on is the Riverkeeper Sweep. Again, that is our annual day of service for that we hold every single year, and it's usually the first Saturday of every May. So by 2050, plastics are projected to exceed fish in the world's oceans and will account for 20% of the world's total oil consumption. Over 600 species have been documented to have ingested marine plastic debris, according to the United Nations Environmental Program. And one way that we are combating this is the Riverkeeper Sweep, again, which is like the annual day of service for the Hudson River and its tributaries, in which you can help join in on a shoreline cleanup or a tree planting project or an invasives removal project at a location near you or anywhere on the Hudson River. And each year, more than 2,000 volunteers turn out. And our biggest sweep, which happened to be our 10th anniversary, had the highest turnout yet with 2,600 volunteers. So hopefully this year we can definitely top that. I'm going to rely on my list right here because I can't remember numbers off the top of my head. So over the course of the 10 years, the Riverkeeper Sweep has been active. It has involved 951 projects and over 18,000 volunteers who have removed 305 tons of debris, including 32 tons of recycling and 1,675 tires. Volunteers have also planted or maintained over 4,655 trees and native plants and removed hundreds of pounds of invasive species. So our next Riverkeeper Sweep is on May 7th. Again, that's a Saturday. And if you were interested in the 2022 Riverkeeper Sweep, you can feel free to email me at leung@riverkeeper.org for more information. And let me know if there's like a location in your community that is in need of a cleanup, removal of invasive plants, or another type of restoration project. I'd be happy to talk to you throughout the process. You can definitely join in as a volunteer, or if you want to take it an extra step further, you can sign on to be a sweep leader, in which you get to organize your very own restoration project, may it be a cleanup or an invasives removal. So and I'd be happy to talk with you to get that process going. And with that, we want to thank everybody for your time tonight, and thank you so much for tuning in and giving up part of your evening on the Super Bowl weekend. But yeah, we are happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you so much again.
So if anybody has questions, they can put it in a chat to us, or they can unmute themselves and ask a question. I'll just give you a minute if anybody has any questions. Katie and Dan, thank you so much. You know, the statistics that you gave us just now, I found those really interesting. Do you have those somewhere on your website that you can share, or?
Yeah, we definitely do. So if I can pop in the chat. I have to exit out of this first. We actually have a whole, I believe that, so this is actually my first time organizing the sweep. The person before, she has analyzed like all the data after the sweep, getting in the data that sweep leaders and volunteers have collected from the projects. And she compiled them into a blog post, as well as you can also look at the hundreds of sites that were active in years past. So I could pop that in the chat very quickly if I can stop sharing.
That's great. So Diane has a question for you. When will ChPe begin testing how much disruption laying their pipeline will have?
I can address that. So ChPes, we say ChPe, Champlain Hudson Power Express, and this is a project that would transmit electricity from hydroelectric dams in Canada to New York City. And it's the subject right now of a decision that the Public Service Commission is making about whether to grant billions of your dollars, my dollars, state subsidies for this project. Riverkeeper's opposing that subsidy and opposing the project. We're very much in favor of transmitting low carbon electricity to New York City. It's an essential part of meeting our climate goals. But it's something we're desperately trying to educate the public about, is that many hydroelectric dams are not low carbon. The flooding of the landscape behind a new dam creates in several ways methane and carbon dioxide that bubble up and out through that impoundment. So it is not a, we are arguing, not a good source of electricity. It has many other impacts beyond that. As Katie was describing, the migrations of fish, essential and free-flowing rivers, those are totally disrupted if you put a dam there. In the case of these Canadian dams, they're also taking indigenous lands from indigenous peoples, often without their consent, or and then poisoning leading to conditions that allow for mercury to poison the fish in the impoundments that are left. So a long way of just a very quick overview of that project. What Diane's asking about is, if it is built, it will come through the part of the Hudson River if it's built as proposed, and it will come right past the Hudson River drinking water intakes. And that's been a big concern for the communities that are in the Hudson 7. And so they are working closely with the company, TDI, that has proposed this project. And the Hudson 7 has put forward a number of suggestions, tangible suggestions for changing the project in the construction phase and adjusting how it would be monitored, because the big concern is if you are using this jet plow technology that they've proposed, you're essentially stirring up the mud as you're going past to lay the cable. As that mud is stirred up, what else comes up with it? PCBs, coal tar, whatever other legacy contaminants might be in the mud. So there's a high concern about that. Their strong preference would be any cable be built on land, not through the Hudson River. But if it is to be built through the Hudson River, they want to improve the controls, improve their assurance that it can be done without disturbing the drinking water supply. So they're actively in that negotiation and trying to achieve a better result from the company should that project go forward. So hopefully that was clear enough and went on with enough detail, but not an overwhelming amount of detail. There's endless amount that we could say about that project and many others.
Any other questions? I wanted to thank both of you. Oh, could you say something about the invasive water chestnuts?
Sure. So the chestnuts are if you're along the Hudson River north of about Beacon, if you're on the train or at the shoreline, any place where there's shallows in the summertime, you'll see those thick mats of green kind of covering the surface of the water. Those are the water chestnuts. If you're walking along the shoreline, you might step on one of those little devil heads, right? The little black spiny seeds. So those are water chestnuts. They've been in the river, I want to say since the 1800s sometime, I forget exactly. And they're here to stay. Unfortunately, that's the case with so many invasive species. Once they're here, you can't really get rid of them. And they do have some significant impacts on the ecosystem. They have largely replaced the native vegetation that would have been in those shallows, which would have been things like eelgrass and water celery, which are rooted in the sediment and produce oxygen that enters the water because of how they're growing. The water chestnut, in contrast, has just one sort of snaking stem. I think I've got the right terminology, to these leaves that are sitting on top of the water. So the oxygen it's creating is pumping into the air, not into the water. So it actually creates a low oxygen environment in those shallows, replacing what had been a very oxygen rich environment. So it's one of the examples of the dramatic changes to the Hudson River ecosystem that have challenged the native fish, because those were areas where you would have had nursery habitat for young of the year fish and foraging habitat for other species to come and eat those little fish. So all of those things are sort of compromised when you change the ecosystem that way. And I know in some communities, like in Esopus, there's been efforts to get these big lawnmowers for the water, where they go and they'll chop, kind of suck up these weeds and then spit them out in a pile on the shore. And you have to go out just like mowing a lawn and do it regularly if you want to clear an area, so you can have a kayak access or something like that. But it takes a lot of management to do anything like that. And unfortunately, there's no getting rid of them. We have to find ways to live with them.
Well, I think the presentation has been informative and wonderful. Thank you. And if anybody is interested in volunteering, please take note of Katie's email and please visit their website. She's put a great link into the chat window that has some amazing information in it. And Katie just put it in the chat window. I also wanted to remind everybody too that this is a monthly program. So we have these wonderful enrichment about local history and how we can improve the Hudson River and our area every single month. So thank you for joining us. And again, thank you to the ambassadors that work so hard to put this program on. They gather the speakers every month, and this has been a fantastic one. So just so you know, next weekend, Sunday, we have the Veterans Flag Changing Ceremony. We have that on the 20th of this month and the 20th of next month. March 13th, you can take a note that we have a great connector series on the Dutchess County Urban Trail, and the information will be up there for you. We also are opening our gift shops at the end of March, and there is a sunrise stroll set. So you guys can come out for our first sunrise stroll of 2022. And in May, we have Mayfest on 21st and 22nd. All that is on the walkway.org site. And please visit riverkeepers.org. It's a really great informational site. And become a member of the walkway. You get discounts on everything and you get to be part of these programs. So thank you, Dan and Katie. And Shirley, do you want to say anything before we leave? No? She's muted. She's like giving thumbs up. So Katie, thank you. Dan, thank you. Everyone have a good evening and happy Valentine's Day tomorrow, everyone.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Great job, guys.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.